Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. John Douillard. Welcome to LifeSpa.com. In today's podcast, I have a really special guest, Donnie Yance. He's an old friend of mine. He's written a couple of amazing books. His first book was called Adaptogens in Medical Herbalism, more of a textbook, really. And his second, more recent one, Herbal Medicine, Healing, and Cancer. He's a master herbalist from the prestigious American Herbalist Guild. He runs an amazing medical center in Ashland, Oregon called the Mediated Center. You can get more information about that at mediarycenter.org. Donnie, welcome. So good to see you again.
Thank you very much for having me, Dr. Douillard. It's my pleasure to be on the show with you.
Yeah, it's great. I remember, we spoke at the Black Mountain Conventions years and years and years ago, and you were always my favorite speaker. If I heard that you were speaking, I would make sure I was there to hear what you had to say. I think that if those who don't know Donnie Yance, you should know the name Donnie Yance. If you ever, he's the expert in herbalism for cancer. He like what I try to do is I back modern science or ancient wisdom with modern science. Donnie's all about the science behind the herbs, and it's so important to have that kind of knowledge. As well as he's, I'll probably screw this up, but he was in seminary for a big part of his life. So he has a really depth of spiritual background. So it's not just medicine, herbal, it's much more of a holistic understanding Donnie has. He's just one of the sweetest, kindest people you'll ever want to know. And if you ever get sick, he's the guy to call for sure. Donnie, thanks a lot. Yeah. Hey, listen, so you wrote an article recently on COVID and the vaccines, and everybody's wondering and worrying, what should I do? Should I get the vaccine? Should I not get the vaccine? I thought your article was really insightful. Can you share a little bit about what you wrote about?
Yeah, I think that we're getting mixed messages in that we're living in a world where there's so much polarization, so much like drastic opposite thinking. So you have the mandate, the government mandate, the so-called, quote, conventional science telling everybody, get the vaccine. If you don't want it, you're doing the right thing for everyone. They're pushing really hard, which I don't agree with. And then you have the opposite. You have people saying, anyone that's had the vaccine, don't go near them. They might transmit to you. It might cause all kinds of problems. I don't see any real hardcore evidence of that, although I think if someone's had the vaccine and they're exhibiting symptoms, it potentially could be problematic. But, I like to back up a little bit. And first of all, I don't really trust any of the data or the information that's being disseminated to us right now through news media and other channels. I would believe it if I saw in my own field some truth being revealed. For example, the CDC and the NIH and Medscape all pulled together a paper last week on therapeutics, COVID and therapeutics. And so what works and what doesn't work? Well, lo and behold, all the things that work are the super expensive drugs like remdesivir, which actually doesn't really work well. The research is not very strong on remdesivir. Things like ivermectin, they show, no research to back that up when that is absolutely not true. They go into vitamin D, say no benefit from vitamin D. They cite one study from Brazil, which was doomed to fail. People that went in the hospital, very ill with COVID, gets a single dosage of vitamin D and they expected that to work. Zinc does nothing. Herbal medicine does nothing. So when I know that that's not true, the evidence is strong to show that none of these things necessarily, quote unquote, treat COVID, but we know that if we support our bodies with these such elements, we're much better positioned to resist COVID, get sick from COVID, and die from COVID. The evidence is so clear that I can't, when they start saying, do the vaccine, there's no problems, I can't believe this to be true. Historically, they've always told us. I have slides of people taking baths of DDT, thinking it was the safest thing that anyone could take. Thalidomide in the 50s. The only medical intervention, here I am, 62 years old, the only medical intervention I've ever had in my body, the only one is having my tonsils ripped out at like 5 years old, prophylactically telling me that was good to do. You don't really need your tonsils. And so when they say certain things I can't trust. So to have hesitation, as I call it, to look at brand new technology being used in these vaccines, to be hesitant, knowing that we don't have any long-term data, they're actually not FDA approved, they're approved for emergency use only. To have caution and hesitancy shouldn't be looked at to be unpatriotic or something coming from ignorance. It's just a matter of looking at everything and knowing what really is what I think is in your best interest. That being said, of all the vaccines out there, even though it was briefly taken off the market, if someone's going to get the vaccine, I do recommend the J&J vaccine, mostly because of maybe 5 reasons. One is it's a one-shot vaccine. 2, it doesn't need all the heavy refrigeration, so it's much easier to transport around. 3, Johnson & Johnson has committed itself to not making any profit on its vaccine, where both Pfizer and Moderna are set to make $30 billion each on their COVID vaccines. A ridiculous amount of money, way more than they've ever made in the history of their companies. And 4, the J&J has been tested in the African variant, the South African variant, with pretty good success, although it didn't completely eradicate the virus. There were no deaths associated with the virus. And 5, overall, the side effects are less and more manageable than the RNA technology in the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. So I don't pick sides and say, people have to make their own decision. My personal decision right now, right, wrong, or different from other people's viewpoint, is to be hesitant and to not. Now, we may all have to be mandated to have the vaccine, and that's another step, another decision we'll all have to make.
Wow. So from the perspective of the Pfizer vaccine and these other vaccines, you feel like there was some information you talked about how some of these vaccines could actually enter into the DNA, although the research was only on when you actually get COVID, the virus could enter into and alter the DNA, but the research wasn't actually on the vaccine. Can you explain the difference?
Well, I think, with any vaccine, you have 2 branches of your immune system, the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system. The way that the immune system is set out to work, because we're built with this life force. We have a belief that we have an innate healing ability, God-given ability to take care of things. And it's all throughout all living organisms, most notably the plant world. Plants are very, very smart, and they've been dealing with viruses and different microbes forever and done very well with it. And so in the innate immune system is the inflammatory component. So that's where we do get an upheaval of cytokines that are pro-inflammatory. That's not a bad thing. We don't necessarily, one thing isn't bad and the other is good. It's all how it works together. There's an orchestration to everything. So when you take these various vaccines, it's a tricking mechanism. How they work generally is to trick the immune system to somehow get through that innate response and try to get right away to an antibody response. So you really kind of bypass certain components of how your immune system works, from these pro-inflammatory state where you get feverish, you get flu-like symptoms. All of that is part of an inflammatory response, but quickly your body should be signaling over to the adaptive immune system, where you make your T cells, which are very important, and then eventually your memory B cells, which then eventually figure out, I know this virus, I know how to eradicate it. So these vaccines are ways of kind of tricking and manipulating this. And we never know, with the spike protein, and whether when we get these other variants, whether we'll get a stronger immune response that will cause potentially more inflammation in the body. And what I'm really mostly concerned about with vaccines is long-term. I tell people, everything you do, think in terms of three ways. What impact does it have you in the short term? What impact in the intermediate, which is months or a couple of years? And then what impact does this have in the long term? So that we see year after year after year, we see this increase of diseases, syndromes, autoimmune diseases, all on the rise, asthma, allergies, mold toxicity, mast cell disease, all these new syndromes and diseases. And I believe that the impact of vaccine overload is causing our immune systems and our body as a whole not to auto-regulate very well. And so again, it's not a specific tie, like this vaccine might have done this, but it's this cumulative effect of vaccines in general. Everything has its place. And so there is a time and a place to do a vaccine. So I'm not like overtly anti-vaccine, but this onslaught of vaccine after vaccine after vaccine, it's impacting us, I have no doubt, generally in a negative way.
So there is some research that I dug up, and I've done a lot of research on the lymphatic system and the newly discovered glymphatic system in the brain, which suggests that we have like 3 pounds of plaque dumping out of our head every year while we sleep at night. And some studies that I read in some of the articles I wrote was that when the brain lymphs get congested, they're linked to anxiety, depression, cognitive decline, inflammation, infection, and in fact, autoimmune concerns. Now, it takes years for these studies to reach medical practice, but there seems like there is a mechanism for autoimmunity, which is when the master computer gets congested, can't get its trash out, and as a result, doesn't know how many fire trucks to send to the fire on Main Street. 1, 100, and creates an overzealous or an underzealous immune reaction. And I've seen some studies with COVID, the long haul effects of COVID, that show that they do impact the lymphatic system, particularly the glymphatic system. Have you dug into that at all?
No, but that completely makes sense to me. And I try not to get so mechanistic on where it's all coming from. But this concept of everything is networked, our body is networked as one whole system. We are networked molecularly, cellularly, and at the organ system level, and everything impacts everything. So again, how I start thinking, and it goes back, is some of our best medicine is non-specific, root nourishing. So I always go back to how do we get, if our health is like a tree, how do we nourish the root system? Then now let's look at the external tree and see what things we need on a specific level to be doing. And again, there are, herbal medicine and dietary medicine and lifestyle medicine can actually lend a helping hand so that we become more robust, that we auto-regulate better, and we auto-organize without dictating, without an herb saying, you need to bring down this cytokine. You got a cytokine storm, IL-1 beta and IL-6 are all going crazy, this and that. We need to get your IL-1 down. No, not necessarily. We need to get something that works harmoniously with our body to trigger it, to give it some support, lend a helping hand that it can figure out if it gets the right support. If that doesn't quite work, you bring in the specific medicine, or you use the support mechanism, the support medicine as the primary medicine, and you use small amounts of the specific medicine. And that's kind of Mediri medicine, or Mediri care 101. It's like really like how to use the combination of non-specific, general supportive medicine with small amounts of specific medicine. And in the wake, almost all the herbs that we would do for what I would say the symptom presentation for COVID, all the herbs that we would typically use for that presentation, so the first phase of COVID, those would all be generally thought of as lymphatic, regulating as well. When you think of yarrow, elderflower, elder leaf, honeysuckle, these plants, even ginger, these plants that are referred to as diaphoretics, they activate the lymph system, they activate diaphoresis. Everything opens up and helps things come out better out of the body, creates movement. So that's the other important part of any way of helping supporting the body, is to get movement. Oxygen moves, lymph moves, blood has to move. And we know that the complications of COVID and with some of the vaccines now is a prothrombotic state. So people get these blood clots. Well, that's blood stagnation. An herb like Achillea, which I mentioned in my last blog, yarrow, what a beautiful plant, one of the great weeds of our world, soldier's herb, or emperor's herb, this amazing, or warrior herb, this amazing herb with this an amphoteric ability that this herb moves the blood, moves the lymph system, good for the kidneys, good for the liver. It's slightly bitter in nature. And not only is it a plant that we would use to prevent blood stases in the wake of something like an infection, but it's also a plant that's used to help the blood to clot when the blood when you say you have a wound to heal or something. That's how they used yarrow in the Civil War, for example. They'd take the yarrow flowers, rub it into his hands, and put that right on the wound. And so, again, this is the beauty of nature. Nature can help do opposite things in different situations. In cancer, it can help with hypomethylation on the systemic level, or at the cancer level, it can suppress hypermethylation. It can scavenge free radicals in healthy cells and induce free radical damage in cancer cells. This is the beauty of nature. This is the beauty of natural medicine.
Yeah, herbal intelligence and how important that is. In Ayurveda, they say don't treat the disease, treat the person who has it. I think that's what you were basically saying. We need to treat the whole body, recognizing everything connects, and you can't just treat one condition or one aspect of the body without affecting everything else.
But our system is set up to think reductionistically like that, and so even people in holistic circles are thought to think that way now. It's really hard to get, because I train practitioners all the time, and still even people that are in a holistic medical setting or trained in herbalism, acupuncture, whatever it is, they still, because we get in the system and our mindsets begin to think like that. Oh, I've got this person with this disease, I got this person with that disease. And yes, in the Mediri system, there's always three things: treat the person, treat the host, treat the microenvironment, and then treat the disease third and last. But you don't ignore the disease, but that's always the third piece: the host, the microenvironment, and the disease. Three pieces to it. And the therapeutics are always botanical medicine, nutritional medicine, dietary medicine, lifestyle medicine, and pharmaceutical medicine. Those are your five toolboxes.
Yeah, well, like you said, it's all set up that way, where the research model is, one drug has to treat everybody with arthritis. Where we know from, an Ayurvedic perspective, from an Eastern perspective, a Mediri perspective, that everybody with arthritis could have a unique and different cause of that arthritis. So you need to treat them all as individuals and treat them accordingly. And we used to laugh at the naturopathic approach, which is sort of Western medicine diagnosis using natural things, as opposed to really doing a more traditional Chinese sort of Ayurvedic look at the host and see where the imbalance was and begin to treat it. And the upstream cause of most imbalances from the Ayurvedic perspective is digestion. I wrote a book called Eat Wheat, and it was all about how people stop eating wheat because they can't digest it. Nuts, seeds, grains, legumes, lectins, they just take stuff out of the diet and they think they've solved the problem. But the reality is that undigested food, or the proteins, the casein and dairy and the lectins and in nuts and seeds and the gluten in wheat, they're hard to digest, and so are the 70 million tons of environmental pollutants dumped in our atmosphere every year. Those toxins have to be digested and detoxified from our body. And if you don't have the digestive strength to digest wheat or dairy or nuts or seeds or grains or legumes or lectins, how are you going to deal with the mercury from the coal mine plumes that are everywhere, that are on all organic vegetables? So the point is, I think what we do is we just think, oh, I'll just take the food out of my diet and solve my problem. But what it actually set us up for is underlying indigestion. And studies show that when proteins and fats are not digested properly from the coal mine plumes and things like that, fat-soluble mercury, they end up too big to get into your blood. They end up in your lymphatic system. They congest your lymph, which is basically carrying your immune system. And then you have a viral, an immune event, and your body is already overwhelmed with inflammation in the immune carrying system. which can affect your joints, can affect your skin, skin-associated lymph, can affect your brain, give you brain fog, or compromise the master computer, which then affects how well it responds to that immune event. So again, I think I love how you think, because it's always talking about, the disease is the last thing we treat. We have to help this person get back into balance. And there's many therapies that, like, I'm curious what you think about things like melatonin, which has been, some really interesting research, not as a sleep hormone, but as a, kind of a connector to the circadian clock, a reset of the circadian clock, and also a detoxer for not just the brain lymph, but supporting detoxification for the whole body.
Yeah, I do use melatonin, and I think there's different ways to think. Again, there's two ways. Do we see melatonin as a way to replace what appears to be a physiological deficiency of melatonin? Either someone's gotten way off with their sleeping patterns, and there we would use like a 0.5 milligram to 1 milligram, which I use, or do we need to go to a higher dosage where now melatonin, we're using dosages that are far beyond what would be normally taken in, but produced by our body naturally. Now it's a pharmacological dosage of melatonin. And that doesn't mean that it's bad to use. That just means now we're going to strong medicine melatonin. We're not trying to normalize the body and bring it back into harmony. We're saying melatonin's got a job to do as an exogenous, hormone. And I try to minimize any kind of medicine that isn't about bringing harmony and balance in. I'll do anything to get someone well. I think that the objective is, if someone is in an ill state, getting them well is where we need to go. But I'm very slow to use very high dosages of melatonin or any other hormone, but I'm not totally opposed to it. And I will, again, do that on occasion, but more likely I'm using very low dosages of melatonin, 0.5 milligram, 1 milligram, maybe 2 milligrams. But I do see a tremendous amount of research into the health benefits of melatonin. Now, does that mean if someone has naturally good, healthy levels of melatonin, they sleep well, they sleep at the right time, do they benefit from giving them more melatonin? I don't personally take melatonin, but I do use it with people. I have no trouble sleeping. I'm a great sleeper. And so I'm not drawn to it intuitively to do things. And again, I try to be as clean and natural. And I love I love using plants and diet as my primary foundation. Then I start bringing things in. And even as I bring nutrients in, people that maybe have methyl defects, everybody wants to load them up with, methyl support. And I said, no, just do a little support, because their whole body, their whole life, they've had methyl defects. So who's to say that their body isn't compensating to some degree and doing okay with it? We identify it, we say maybe they could do a little bit better, but I believe it's better to do a little bit of support and see what happens than too much support. Because when you do too much support, you're now replacing what the body, and the body tendency is to get lazy. If you have a low thyroid and you've exhausted everything in the natural toolbox to get someone well, you use the low. You don't just go on any dosage of thyroid. Use the lowest dose possible and see what happens. If that doesn't work, you just go slowly up until you find the right spot, as opposed to, because if you take too much, you're not supporting the body, you're replacing the body. You're replacing the thyroid, and we want to help the thyroid, not replace it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some interesting research, Donnie, that you like, is by a researcher named Al Lewy, Lewy. Mm-hmm. And he did research on low dose melatonin. 0.1, 0.5 milligrams work is just as good as 5 milligrams.
Nice.
So the research is trending in that direction, where just a little bit. And as we do age, get over after menopause or over 50 or 60, we do start producing less melatonin. So one way to sort of hack the aging process, if you will, is to take a micro dosing of melatonin, just to encourage natural production. I did a podcast with a melatonin researcher, and she told me that the melatonin at the right dose encourages production versus at a higher dose, which may
well, that's exactly my point. And But
Right.
here's the other thing, as we age, people have this conception that our hormones all go down. And I think that's true to a degree, but more so true than that is that they get more inefficient. And so everyone's heard of the term insulin resistance, right? So we have like a big term. I think every hormone gets resistant. So you have thyroid resistance, testosterone resistance, estrogen. How could it be that prostate cancer and hormone positive breast cancer increase after the older we live, when we have the highest level of estrogen and testosterone when we're young? Why wouldn't we be getting cancer young? Women aren't supposed to have estrogen, at 65, 70 years old, but yet they have this estrogen cancer. It's because of resistance. So all of our hormones are getting resistant. The receptors are all clogged up. How we're producing them isn't working well. Things that carry them from the cell receptor into the cell engine, everything is working less efficiency. So again, a big part of what I think natural medicine does and can do is slowly make the body work a little bit more efficiently. And then again, we still may use a little bit of that microdosage of melatonin, but we've done everything we can to maximize it in the most closest way with nature as possible. And melatonin's found in different foods, and even just getting light on your eyes first thing in the morning sets the circadian clock. There's a lot of other ways to encourage melatonin production than just taking melatonin. And there's precursors to melatonin like serotonin, and so there's relationships between all of these things as well.
Interesting. When you talk about the hormonal resistance, I wonder if you think that's due to endocrine disruptors, and how do you deal with those? There was a book out that just came out called Countdown recently about the epidemic of infertility, where I think in the last 50 years we have 40% less childbirths or fertility than we did. I think the study just came out this morning, I saw it in the news, that we have the lowest rates of births since the 1940s happening right now. And this one researcher did all the research and realized that we've been, slowly being unable to make babies because of all these endocrine disruptors. So do you think the endocrine disruptors which pollution basically, have the impact with regard to the hormone resistance you talk about? And then how do you fix it? How do you get rid of all these endocrine disruptors, if that's the case?
Well, I think that is a major cause. There's no doubt that endocrine disruptors in our environment are a major cause of infertility problems, hormone related cancers, and as well as there's an increase of female birth compared to male birth for the first time too in our society. So more girls are being born proportionately to men, which has never happened before. There's always been this perfect balance. So that's also a result, because the endocrine disruptors have more of a tendency to feminize us. You're seeing boys, 13, 14 years old with breasts. It's like we're seeing a whole change in our anatomy as a result of that. And then that leads to more obesity, all kinds of other problems. So there's no doubt. And then another effect is the impact of our way of living, of overstimulation and an output of more stress hormones. So the more output of energy, the less input. So how we keep our reproductive hormones healthy is this input of energy, which a lot takes place while we sleep. We sleep, our bodies restore. If we sleep less than, say, 7 hours, 7 to 9 hours is optimal, and we say, oh, I get up, I feel great, everything's fine, I don't need more than 6 hours. Yeah, you can relate. Your perspective on your health is good, but slowly there's a diminishing effect on some of these important anabolic hormones. They're going down. They're going down, and as a way, the body compensates and says the adrenal gland needs to be bigger. So our adrenal glands are getting bigger to make more stress hormones at the expense of our reproductive health. So that's another cause. Now, how do we fix it? There's always two ways to fix it. We can fix it by lowering our exposure to them or reducing our exposure. So obviously in dietary cases, eating food that is not potentially been altered by substances, growth hormone and various antibiotics, which can also mimic hormones, and all the plastics that we're exposed to, so reduce our exposure to the best of our ability, and now mitigate it, mitigate it with natural medicine. And so there's a lot of ways that we can help our bodies deal and interrupt endocrine disruptors before they can get to the receptors and kind of plug them up. That's what they do. The receptors think they're the hormone. They go to the receptor and they're not the hormone. And so not only is it cause health problems, but it's a double problem. We have this unknown substance binding to a receptor that's a hormone supposed to bind to, and we don't have the hormone binding anymore either. So so it's a double problem when it comes to that. So there are a lot of things in our diet that can kind of clean that up. We hear about epigenetic regulators, phenolic substances, carotenoids, the brassicas family, all of the isothiocyanates, all of these to some degree mitigate endocrine disruptors. That's why I think having those in the diet is very, very imperative. Of course, I'm a big proponent of adaptogens that help normalize this as well. They're fertility promoting, and then a lot of herbs that have sterol components in them, because herbs have plants have, we're not that different than plants. And so plants have plant sterols, which are plant hormones. Then you have plant hormones called ectosterones or ectosteroids. And these substances have profound beneficial effects on binding to our receptors and not being hormones themselves, but again, maximizing the innate ability of us to enhance that anabolic state of our hormones. So anabolic always refers to the ability to build ourselves back up, to strengthen, to make us strong and robust. And so those substances are all throughout nature, and actually even in food. So the two foods that are rich in ectosterones, which again are anabolic foods, are spinach and quinoa. So I always crack up because nobody even knew what ectosterones were, until 25, 30 years ago, maybe more, maybe 40 years ago. And what was it, 50, 60 years ago, Popeye would eat a can of spinach or eat a whole thing of spinach and get big muscles. So it turns out that spinach is actually a good food for, building muscles in the body.
That's great. Amazing. So, wow. I wonder, in Ayurvedic medicine, one of the strategies for getting rid of those endocrine disruptors is something called lipophilic mediated detox, where you take something like ghee, clarified butter, and you take it on a calorie restricted diet, and that ghee has its ability to kind of chelate or attach to fat soluble toxins in your tissues and kind of chelate them out of your body, called lipophilic mediated detox. And it's been well studied. In fact, they use many types of fats in modern medicine to pull toxins. But in Ayurveda, the studies have been done that it actually pulls pesticides and preservatives out of your tissues to the tune of 40, 50% in a couple of studies that were done, which is pretty fascinating. And I wonder what you think about that from a detox perspective.
Yeah, I think when you do modified fasting, for sure, a way that the body then has to, when it's not getting enough calories in, to provide, an energy exchange, the body has to now start breaking down itself. And a great way, the way it's supposed to do, is primarily go to fat storage. And then you have, white fat and brown fat. So we're going to start breaking down that white fat, which is stubborn and stingy, but a lot of the toxins reside in that white fat. So I don't know about using, ghee to do that. I don't know about that research, but conceptually, that makes a lot of sense to me, because as the body, fat will bind to fat. And I don't know how well it carries it out. It makes some sense to me, but ultimately we're also going to be taking that fat and breaking it down, which can apparently be a little bit more toxic on our body. So I usually don't like to, I'm usually slow to have people do that. I said slow and steady is my way. There's no rush, to slow and steady, because I don't want to overwhelm the body, because the fat cells are like a little garbage collection. So they take all these substances that are otherwise going to be harmful to our body, and they stuff them into the fat, where they do the least harm to the body. And so when we start releasing this stuff, having something to bind it and carry it out, I think is good. But at the same time, if we're calorically restricting, our bodies are going to sequester that fat for energy production too. So we just have to be a little bit, careful. And I think using maybe some other substances to help with that, the endocrine disruptors as well. Like I said, the sulfuric kind of compounds, sulforaphane, the compounds in cabbage sprouts, wasabi, all those substances are great. The phenolic compounds like ellagic acid in pomegranates and strawberries, that's another really good one. The sulfur, anything that increases NRF2. So NRF2 is a master kind of chelator of those substances. And so all those phenolic and phytoalexin compounds, pterostilbin, resveratrol, anthocyanins, various carotenoids, all of these substances that are found abundantly in a healthy diet are all going to help us to also chelate out those toxic substances too. So fat binding, I think, yeah. Trying to think what else would be specifically useful. Again, I just take my time with people. I don't think there's a race to detoxify people.
I think, I'm fascinated by Dr. Walter Longo's research from USC, who did a lot of longevity research, and he found exactly what you're saying. If you fast for extended period of time and sort of rush the autophagy and rush the detox, that there's risks involved. Mm-hmm. And what I really loved about his research was he created something called the fasting mimicking diet, which was almost identical to what the Ayurvedic diet was, which is a small amount of khichdi, calorie restricted, but you're still getting 800 to 1,000 calories per day. Mm-hmm. Plus the ghee as a chelator, which seemed to match, his research seemed to match the ancient wisdom of doing a cleanse where you're not fasting, you are eating, you're not in any rush, you're actually very comfortable, but you're getting the benefits of autophagy and stem cell activation by actually having a somewhat calorie restricted diet, but not in any way a fast, but you've got this chelation effect, this lipophilic mediated detox thing happening where you end up having that kind of an effect. I also love the fact that you talk about all these different foods. And, as you know, I'm fascinated by seasonal eating and how the microbes in the soil change from one season to the next, and how the foods that are harvested in season have specific effects for the body in specific ways. And I wondered if you make any adjustments seasonally based on whether you're giving cauliflower or broccoli or pomegranate or anything like that. Is that on your radar?
Completely on my radar. I think it's one of the many lenses I try to utilize when setting up a personalized diet for someone. So if I went through it, the list of things that I try to think about, one would be nutrigenomics and nutrigenetics. And so those are two different things. Nutrigenomics is the impact that various foods have on epigenetic signaling. Nutrigenetics is that everyone is a different genotype and the same food may affect different people differently. So we all could eat broccoli and some people get more benefit than others. And so, a good example is certain people with VDR polymorphisms, certain genotypes that have that are more susceptible to the impact of caffeine, high amounts of caffeine inducing osteoporosis. And so it's only certain genotypes do they need to be more concerned with over caffeine consumption. Another example is even in the realm of oncology, looking at people that take a certain drug like irinotecan or CPT11, that if they are a UGT1A1, they have that particular SNP, then they don't metabolize that drug well. And they need a fraction of the dosage, and yet they're not tested for it. So understanding, and this is complicated, but that's one area to look at diet, understanding diet. Another is totally seasonal eating, also geographical location. So going into the fall, what kind of foods help build our in Chinese medicine, they would say wu qi, that immune system to adapt to the colder weather, less sunlight, more rooted vegetables, substances like that. And sometimes it's it's very natural, because they're the foods that come in season. So nuts like walnuts, we're eating then. We're eating fruits like apples and pears are great for the lungs. They're a kind of moistening food, so the lungs don't dry out. So I have people poach pears. So yeah, there's all kinds of ways. And then somebody living on the equator needs to eat differently than somebody living, in Alaska per se. Other factors would be their culture or their heritage. I'm primarily Italian, so I like Mediterranean diet for the most part. I have a really diverse diet, but you have to understand your culture, what kind of foods your family likes to eat, what kind of foods you emotionally are drawn to, how much food should be cooked, how much food should be raw. And a big part of diet that people leave out all the time, I always say, I don't need to know what you don't eat, because that's how everyone starts out, right? I said, what's your diet like? Well, I don't eat this, I don't eat that. I said, I don't want to know what you don't eat. Tell me what you eat. And that's number one. Tell me what you eat. Number two is, all right, now tell me how you eat. And they said, well, what do you mean, how do you eat? I said, what time of day do you eat? Do you sit down and eat? Do you prepare your meals? Are you on the go when you're eating? These are all little things that people don't realize. I say, because digestion is a facilitation of energy. If your energy is elsewhere, of course, you're not going to have good digestion. So then other things we look at, like the presentation of acute and chronic disease. If someone has arthritis, rheumatoid, we might do certain foods that make more sense for them. If they have myelosuppression from chemotherapy, then we need more blood and bone marrow supportive foods. If they have high uric acid and gout, we need things that help, work with the excretion of uric acid, things like celery juice, things like soured black cherries. If they have kidney stones, we need a diet that helps deal with that, or generally high parathyroid or hypercalcemia, which a lot of people suffer from. I think it's I'm finding one of the most under-recognized conditions in people. People all test now and look for, it's on their radar and probably overly treated is hypothyroidism. But the other component is this hyperparathyroidism that I'm seeing all the time in people. And maybe it's from people taking too much isolated vitamin D. Maybe it's from taking calcium. I don't know what the causative factors are, but I'm seeing a lot of that as well. So then we need certain things like celery seed is amazing, and celery juice for dealing with, oxalic acid, high intake of oxalic acid. And so, those are off the top of my head, a lot of the things that would have to do with a personalized diet. But my diets are always sensible. They're always have a concept of holism. They always include a good amount of whole grains, diverse whole grains, fruit, vegetables. I tend to lean generally to a diet that is about 15 to 18% animal food, and then 82 to 85% plant food. And so I feel like, generally speaking, that ratio most people do well on. I don't eat any meat, but I do eat fish and I do eat some dairy, but it's a complement to the bulk of plant food that I eat. It's not a major piece of my diet. And I find that diet is a good diet that people can resonate with. But my diet, similar to yours, is that I happen to think and believe, based on looking at science, very carefully reviewing science, that whole grains are probably the greatest contributor to good health, more than anything else, and potatoes. And so I feel like, if I was to name a superfood, it'd probably be a potato. It's the only single food that can sustain human life. And a purple potato has more anthocyanins than any super berry you can ever name. When you're looking at what makes it all purple, is that purple pigment is the same thing that makes berries like blackberries and purple. Yeah, what research shows is that the anthocyanins in the potato are far more bioavailable than those in eating berries. And so, and then you talk about ghee. So when we take certain foods, like say, put a little ghee on our potato, that also brings out and increases the bioavailability of all the nutrients in that potato. Same with olive oil and broccoli, or cooking tomatoes and making tomato sauce, and the lycopene in the tomatoes much better when you cook the tomatoes with the olive oil than the raw tomatoes. And so those are just a little bit of my 2 cents. And if you want to look at like research, like profound meta-analysis research, pooled analysis showing that eating whole grains more than any other food is associated with reduction of cancer, heart disease, and all-cause mortality. So, the concept that people are on that staying away from grains and whole grains is going to better their health is just not based on anything truthful. There isn't science to back that up, and there isn't any traditional diet that I'm aware of that eats that way that is known for good and long health.
Yeah, no doubt. I tried to make that case. I think we had over 600 references in my book, Eat Wheat, trying to cite the science on the other side of the equation, because the gluten-free industry just became, a billion-dollar industry. And on the heels of that, we have the trend against grains and starches of any kind are still pretty strong, with the keto diet being alive and well. What's your take on that?
Oh, I think I've done 2 blogs on it. I think overall, I always quote Ben Franklin. So a place for everything, everything's in its place. So I don't like to totally say there isn't a possibility in epilepsy and certain conditions where doing a short-term, healthy version of the keto diet, I won't eliminate that from a possibility of something that somebody can do. But generally, I would be completely against it for any kind of long-term health for anyone. I'm not a proponent of it for any of my patients or anyone that comes to me. But I think it can be done and still be maintained to be relatively healthy. You can choose healthy fats. Some people's liver, some people's kidneys can handle it. Some people can keep the weight on. Some people can't. Some people can digest all that fat and others can't. And then there's also the impact of hyperacidity in the body induced from that kind of diet too, because it's a very acid forming diet in the body, and that's anything what we want to do. So I'm not a proponent of it. I like a really diverse and balanced diet. I think what makes up a good diet is healthy fats, healthy carbohydrates, and a nice balanced approach of all of those foods. And that's what works. And if someone tells me I don't digest carbohydrates really well, I start to break it down and try to understand where the problem is and what form they've been eating in. How do we change that? How do we reintroduce it to their diet and have it work for them? But as I think I mentioned before, people have a lot of misconceptions, because when they go on a keto diet or a very severe carbohydrate restrictive diet, they lose a lot of water weight, because one of the roles of carbohydrates, outside of the great amount of nutrition we get from them, is that they do play a role with salt to help our bodies hold water. And then it gives our bodies a chance for all our cells to absorb water, because water is like an essential element to good health. And as people get older, one of the most underrated components of poor health as people get older is dryness. Our bodies are getting weaker, so we're getting more catabolic and we're drying out. We're losing our moisture, our flexibility, our elasticity. It's obvious when you see elderly people that they're dry and frail. And so this concept of how do we hydrate our cells better? Well, starch plays a big role in that. So when you deal with whole food starch, you're not just dealing with white flour and a bunch of salt, which then goes right to our gut, sits there, absorbs all this water, and we feel very bloated and extended. And then when we stop that for a few days, we say, wow, all my bloatedness is gone, mostly as a result of all that excess water weight you were holding is now gone. So that can be helpful. If someone has a lot of ascites in the body, that's an area where I'll restrict carbohydrates sometimes. Ovarian cancer, where their whole belly is blown up like a balloon filled with water. It's a result of their cancer, of course. But there I do restrict carbohydrates a little bit to get their lymph to drain a little bit better. But it's very short term, and it's not at all a good diet for long-term health to do that.
Let's talk a minute about your specialty, which is in fact cancer, and how you treat that. I just want to give you a quick glimpse of the Ayurvedic perspective. That's sort of our audience here, so I want you to kind of tie the two together if it's possible. Ayurveda says that cancer is the loss of memory, or what's called smriti, of how to function as part of the whole. And the cells, because of nutrition and not functioning optimally or getting the waste out as efficiently as it could, the cell loses the memory of proper function. It doesn't have the nutrition to divide and become two healthy new cells, so they create some type of mutagenic effect to stay alive. And they kind of proliferate in a rogue way to stay alive because they don't have the nutrition and the waste out, the communication to restore the memory, how to function as part of the whole. So from the Ayurvedic perspective, it's always about bringing the body back into balance. So, the intestinal tract is functioning in sync and in harmony with the liver and your stomach and your pancreas, and all those are working in sync, restoring the memory of whole function. This is Donnie's, specialty. He is the master really in the country for treating cancer naturally and herbally. So this is really important that we get to listen to him about this.
Yeah, so I mean, we can go into a lot of different areas to understand cancer and how I approach, but I'll start with kind of what I said before. There are three distinct areas that I work in. One is the host, so that is a little bit subjective and requires a relationship, questioning symptom presentation, evaluating the constitution of that patient. And the idea is to build the most robust health in that patient you possibly can from every vantage point you can see and every tool you can use. The second target that we look at is what I refer to as the microenvironment, which is primarily assessed through laboratory testing. And so we can look at various markers, we can look at microterrain markers, pH markers, we can look at nutrient assessment, vitamin D, both forms of vitamin D, zinc and copper and ceruloplasm, blood rheology, because cancer can't do any damage unless it hijacks the microenvironment. So that's one of the things as it takes over. It takes over the immune system. So for example, the best way to look at where a cancer patient is at, the most reliable way is a simple CBC, the simplest blood test. You do not want to have cancer patients with high neutrophils, low lymphocytes, or high platelets. Very, very important to look at that, because neutrophils, there's two types of neutrophils, N1, N2, different types of macrophages, M1 and M2. M2 and N2 all facilitate tumor growth. Lymphocytes fight cancer, cytotoxic T cells, natural killer cells. So one of the things cancer does is it hijacks the microenvironment and starts doing things. It builds fibrin, it changes the pH to being very acidic. So the microenvironment is very acidic, very stagnant. Blood rheology is completely altered. You can look at D-dimer, fibrinogen, those are elevated in active cancer frequently. So that's the microenvironment. So that's the second area we look at. The third area is the cancer itself, primarily from a phenotype. So when you started to talk about Ayurveda, so there's a lot of testing and genotyping now. So molecular profiling, looking at the genome, the gene sequencing. And the gene sequencing is a starting point, but it's so complex, it never tells you who the driver is and who the passenger is. And so, you can be in the car with, 6, 7 people, and the cop pulls you over for speeding, and he pulls a guy out of the back seat and arrests him. So that's kind of like looking at the genome. It's only through the phenotype that So the phenotype is the actual behavior, and that's affected by epigenetics. And so we are all born with the potential to have cancer. There's various assessing genes now. I mean, even in breast cancer, there's 27, I think now, genes that can be tested, from check mutations, BRCA mutations, the ARID mutations are another one. So these various ATM mutations, those are also the P53 mutation. So the phenotype means that the mutation is the driver mutation. So finding driver mutations. So that has to do with epigenetics and studying the molecular energy of the cancer. So cancer is an intelligence. It's an energy. And so some cancers have a very low IQ, they're very dumb, others are very intelligent. So how do we decipher that? Well, we look at these various molecular profiling panels of somebody. So we test the disease itself, the cancer. We use things to target that disease that make the most sense, applying all of our toolboxes, which include allopathic medicine, but often a different way than standard of care. So it's not like the tools set out for cancer are all bad. You don't avoid everything that's in that toolbox, but their application is what's all wrong. It's like the tools are good, whether they be targeted therapy, low dose chemotherapy, immunotherapy. It's all knowing how to use that toolbox and how do you use that toolbox to integrate it into a holistic model. See, that's what I do. You create the model, and then you see how pharmaceutical medicine fits into that model. You don't do Ayurvedic medicine here. Like, this is what I find, is that you have an Ayurvedic practitioner that can only think Ayurvedically and sees the patient and does things. Meanwhile, they're going to the standard of care doctor and they're doing the standard of care practice. And if that patient is getting treatment that is not helpful and often harmful to them, as good as you are as an Ayurvedic doctor, your patient will go downhill. The only way that you see consistency in patient getting well, one after the other, is when all the pieces are working together. So that's why our motto in Mediated Care is called Together We Heal. All these pieces come together, and there's no bias, there's no like anything like that. And there's a concept that is inherent in knowing that we can only know so much. And so to embrace a model that includes some ambiguity, like some uncertainty, basically, that we don't know why all the pieces work together, but the whole is what makes it work, the synergy of the whole. The model of medicine today is to reduce everything so you can study that one thing and see how it works. One last thing on that, just on diet and talking about, so there's this big movement of immunotherapy in oncology. And we're talking primarily about what's called checkpoint inhibitors that target different receptors. Like forever, I mean, you and I have been around the same amount of time. So forever, we've always been told years ago in the 70s, 80s, 90s, oh, your immune system has nothing to do with cancer, right? Remember? That's like they said, oh, it doesn't do any good to do anything to improve your immune system. Now, 5, 6, 7 years ago, they have this whole new branch of medicine called immunotherapy. So what happened was the immune system had nothing to do. So, but here's the thing, that immunotherapy in oncology isn't about the immune system. It's about blocking receptors that are on the cancer's surface that are enabling the cancer to camouflage itself to the immune system. So these are called checkpoint inhibitors, and the primary ones are called PD-1 and PD-L1 inhibitors. So and these are actually very good drugs, particularly in a setting of holistic medicine, because everything we do for a patient is so conducive to maximizing the benefit of those drugs. Never before in history have we had standard of care medicine in immunotherapy be so appropriately fit into a holistic model as that, because we block the receptors with that are offsetting the immune system. Now we, with our tools, build a robust immune system in the patient. The most determining factor to people that do well compared to people that don't are people that have the most diverse microbiome. How you develop a diverse microbiome is through primarily a diverse diet. The most important food is whole grains. So people that eat complex carbohydrates, whole grains and potatoes, along with probiotic food, fermented food, prebiotic, and then the short chain fatty acids where you build your butyrate from. So as these whole grains ferment in your body, they create a microenvironment that builds short chain fatty acids and butyrates that proliferate T cells and get your immune system totally in this great state of health. that then they're all set to go to work when that programmed death receptor is blocked. The worst thing to be doing is a keto diet, number one. The second worst thing to do is to take antibiotics. The third worst thing to do is to take proton pump inhibitors. And the fourth worst thing to do is to be on steroids. All four of those things will negate the benefits from immunotherapy.
So do you work with oncologists to kind of help you get these medications? And how did you establish those relationships? They're usually not too friendly to, herbalists and things.
It's a great question. And we on the Mediated board, so our board is made up of 3 oncologists, just so you know. So on our board of like 9 or 10 people, a third of them are oncologists and very well-known, reputable oncologists too. And as well as our director of education, who's a professor at Harvard. So, but I've lectured at some of the most prestigious institutions in the country and spent a week lecturing at the biggest hospital in Tel Aviv, Israel. So to the whole entire oncology department, actually. So the way that there's 2 things that I've been able to do to build relationships. One is to study 1 to 2 hours a day to know their toolbox better than them. So I know every single drug in oncology, experimental drugs, non-experimental drugs, every type of targeted therapy, specific drugs like check inhibitors, EGFR inhibitors, mTOR inhibitors, PIK3 inhibitors, you pretty much name it. I know those class of drugs pretty well. I can, read blood work like better than anyone. I can read pathology very, very well. So I study every single day. I accumulate data. So when I converse with them, I can speak their language. And so when they know that I can converse with them, then I can then bring them over and say, well, why I want to test the fibrinogen and D-dimer in your patient is 2 benefits. Benefit 1 is that you do know that cancer patients are 7 to 10 times higher risk of dying of blood clots than normal people are. So a great cause of death in cancer patients is throwing a blood clot and dying. And then most of the drugs they give, from chemotherapy to steroids to some of the other targeted therapies like thalidomide and Revlimid, these drugs increase that risk. So by testing the best blood markers to assess that, we can maybe intervene and do things to prevent that from happening. Now, the other benefit is that the fibrin, which is the build of fibrin and the reduction of plasmin, is ability of the cancer to hypercoagulate the blood to build the tumor. So the tumor is kind of like a bird's nest. It's creating the blood into this very stringy quality, and that's conducive to the cancer. So when we reduce that, all of a sudden we're reducing the risk of a prothrombotic episode in the patient, but we're also making everything else we work better. So when you're able to remove that stagnation and move the blood with blood-moving herbs and enzymes, particularly lumbrokinase, the enzyme from the earthworm, that one is probably the best at that, but other proteolytic enzymes are useful as well. But you use enzymes and herbs, and in very extreme cases, you can use low molecular heparin, which is a pharmaceutical. And believe it or not, low-dose nitroglycerin is an amazing agent too, to help too. So anyway, those are the 2 things, is that and also the other thing, they see how good my patients do. So when they see someone that comes to me, all of a sudden they're looking great and doing well, then they after year after year after year, you got a stage 4 cancer patient surviving year after year, living a normal life. Eventually they say, there's something that this patient's doing that my other patients aren't. And so then they eventually, you develop a rapport with them. And I actually have to talk to an oncologist as soon as I finish this call with you about a patient, complex patient, actually. So anyway, that's kind of how I've been able to make some headway. But every day is a battle. Every time I get on the phone with somebody new, I have to start all over again if they don't know who I am, and go through the rigmarole. So it's one person at a time. We kind of get over. But we've been trying to launch clinical trials with major institutions, but because of the model, the reductionistic model, and this theoretical fear around herb-drug interaction, I keep trying to tell them herb-drug interaction is a good thing, not a bad thing. Herbs can piggyback on with drugs and increase their designated design target. They can work around the target and do other things. They can reduce resistance of cancer cells to the target, and they can mitigate the side effects of that drug. So there's a whole way that herbs are tremendously helpful along with drug therapy. So yes, there's interaction, but for the most part, when you're doing what you're supposed to, that interaction is very, very positive. And 99% of the negative information you hear on herb-drug interaction is based on theory, on looking at pharmacokinetics, not pharmacogenomics or pharmacodynamics. And I don't want to get too technical, but pharmacokinetics is understanding that not only looking at an herb, but an isolated compound in an herb that affects an enzyme that the drug is metabolized through. As soon as they see that herb has impacted that enzyme that detoxifies that drug, they automatically say that's a negative herb-drug interaction without actually seeing that to be truthful. It's all based in theory, because the objective in the end is, did it interfere with the cytotoxic effects of the drug? And there's no research. Even the most malign herb of all time, which is St. John's wort, Hypericum, which does upregulate, the 3A4, the 2D6 pathways, and does impact drug metabolism, particularly if you're taking it at a high enough dosage, say 900 to 1600 milligrams of a standardized St. John's wort extract. If that's the case, then you could reduce the blood level of that drug by as much as 1/3, so 35% reduction. And they studied that, and that's potentially possible. But the same studies that study that interaction found no reduction in kill effect by the cytotoxic drug. In other words, the tumor wasn't less reduced, and in some studies it was enhanced, and it also reduced a lot of the side effects. And so the end result was that the herb did not interfere, even though it brought the blood levels down. And that's called phytocodynamics. That is, the end result is what actual impact. You take herb A at this dosage, drug A at this dosage, take them together, what does the end result happen? Not theoretically what we think might happen, what actually happens. Because there's a lot of metabolites. The other thing is that understanding metabolism. So all these companies talk about, we have better herbal absorption because we liposome it, we nanoparticle size it, we do this, that, and the other thing, and we show these blood levels of curcumin that are higher than other companies. That's a bunch of hogwash as well, because you're not supposed to have curcumin in your bloodstream. It's supposed to convert into metabolites. Tetrahydrocurcuminoids, for example, is the most active curcumin. So everything we eat, like soy, we don't have genistein in our bloodstream. It converts into equal. So everything ferments and undergoes a transformation. Our bodies do something in the gut with it, and we absorb metabolites of those compounds that are different than the actual compound. And so, and this is just different sides of the same coin, I guess, looking at curcumin and blood levels as a way of understanding that you're getting better benefit from the curcumin by having higher blood levels, which is not the case.
Yeah, I did see one study where a certain amount of curcumin actually had a beneficial effect on boosting stem cells, but too much actually blocked the stem cell activation. And I think that's our culture is, the more, the better. 1,000-time potential extract potency, is going to be better if it's 100 times or 1,000 times more potent. Where the body, one thing about that I've learned in Ayurveda, and I think so well, is that the more subtle something is the more powerful it is. And if you can manipulate the microenvironment in a subtle way, you can have a more powerful holistic effect versus a chemical reaction that is sort of, a an isolated event where that may be good or may be bad.
But here's a great point, because I love what you just said. And I think of medicine in two ways: heroic and humble. And so humble medicine is what I really love to do. You know, humble medicine is slower and less noticeable and less predictable, and less causation, like you did this and it did that, you know, and it's more beautiful and it's more poetic. And that's what I love. So in our model, it's the traditional medical models that go into Madiri care are eclectic medicine, physiomedicalism, traditional Chinese medicine, and Ayurvedic medicine. So we kind of use theories from those different systems and mold them together. And what I love about Ayurveda is that, you know, you never see them using single herbs, or very rarely. I mean, they're always recipes, these very, and sometimes lots and lots of plants in the recipes. And I really love that concept of restoration, you know, that kind of that Ayurvedic concept of restoration. So it's so apparent in there. And so that is a big part of our medicine too, is that concept. And you know, some of the most well-researched herbs now are big Ayurvedic herbs, you know, herbs that I use, ashwagandha. I mean, the research on that herb alone in oncology is just amazing. You know, I'm going to do a lecture in a couple of weeks on cancer stem cells, because you mentioned stem cells. So I'm going to be doing a lecture on natural compounds that reduce cancer stem cells, because conventional medicine, as good as it is, predominantly chemotherapy, not only does it not, and radiation, not only does it not target cancer stem cells, but it actually enriches them. It fortifies them so they get stronger. And the best way to target cancer stem cells is with natural medicine. And one of the most researched compounds is withenialoid A, which is one of the withenialoids in ashwagandha. So that has I probably have 15 papers on that compound alone targeting cancer stem cells. And so it's an amazing plant in the realm of its impact on mood and anxiety, to adaptation and energy. You know, it's profoundly, and then my number one kind of female tonic herb is Shatavarya. So that I use more Shatavarya. That's my chief herb. When I talked about moistening and drying, the best herb, if I was going to select one herb to moisten the body, it would be Shatavarya.
People complain about that, about it because of the estrogenic effects, but I've seen research.
No, that's completely false. Matter of fact, John, it's got tons of research on it against breast cancer, and it doesn't have a real estrogenic effect. And that's, you know, that's the misconception. You know, plants have compounds, and that's the language problem. We keep applying the wrong language to plants. Plants have compounds that mimic estrogen receptors, like flavonoids, and particularly isoflavonoids. And they're not abundant in Shatavarya, by the way, nor are they at all in Semicifuga, black cohosh. You know, but some plants like red clover do have a lot of the biotin A. And not only do these not promote or induce breast cancer, but they inhibit breast cancer we mentioned the endocrine disruptors. So isoflavones have the ability to get to receptors, hormone receptors, bind to them, not induce an impact, a mitotic impact on the cell to proliferate it, and block the either the endocrine disruptor or the endogenous or exogenous estrogens that may be proliferative. So not only are they not inducing to cancer, but they are inhibitory to cancer. And the research is very clear and undebatable. It's so clear on those. I mean, they've been trying to say black cohosh is problematic in breast cancer patients, and every study just keeps showing that women that take the black cohosh have less reoccurrence of their breast cancer, not more. So that's the state. So Shatavarya is completely safe in people that have had breast cancer or hormonal cancer. In my book, which you were going to hold up, I have what I call a mini monograph on it, but I update all my monographs. So I write a monograph. Every single herb I use, I write my own personal monograph on. My monograph on curcumin or turmeric is about 450 slides, about 300 pages long right now. And pretty much every week I update these monographs with study after study after study. My Shatavarya monograph is probably more like 50 citations on that one. But it's an immune modulator. It's great for the GI tract. It combats stress. And rest assured, it's very, very profoundly safe. And so those are two of my favorite plants that we use, and they're based in Ayurveda for sure.
Right. Wonderful. Donnie, I think we could talk all day. I know that you could. You're just so brilliant, and you're helping so many people. And I hope that people really, really listen to this and get how valuable a resource you are for all of us out here.
Thank you. Well, you are as well.
You.
I love everything that you put out and everything you say, so and I don't say that easily, just so you know. I don't pay that many people that are out in our field those kind of compliments, but I enjoy everything that you write, and certainly your book on wheat is a beautiful book that I completely 100% endorse.
Well, thanks, Donnie, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on. I'm so grateful. I'm really honored to talk to you, and so good to connect again after all these years.
Thank you. You as well. And let's do it again. Okay. And many blessings to you and your family and your audience.
Yeah, you bet. Everybody, mediricenter.org. That's MEDERI center.org. Is that right, Donnie?
That's right. And my blog is just my name, DonnieYance.com, DonnieYance. And the last thing I'll say is that you didn't mention, but I'm also a musician, a jazz musician, and I just put out a CD called Heaven Awaits, which is anyone can go on any of the Spotify, CD Baby, any of those iTunes and listen to it. But I wrote all the music on it. It's 10 songs. I'm a bass player. A lot of them are bass melody. I'm a jazz musician, and Gino Vanelli wrote one song on it called Hope Alley. And even though it's kind of jazz, it's very easy listening, and it's all spiritual music. So the title track is called Heaven Awaits, which is kind of a dedication song both to all of my patients that have passed on, and it's kind of a meditation song in that it is a meditation on the reflection of heaven and earth.
Wow, you are so brilliant. So great to have you on. We'll do this again. Thanks so much.
Thank you. You're so welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye. Do you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe and share.
This recording is brought to you by LifeSpa, where ancient Ayurvedic wisdom meets modern science. Get access to free health video newsletters by Dr. John at lifespa.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.